Okay, so our speaker for this evening, and again, thanks everybody for attending tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Oudemans, who is the professor and director of plant pathology at Rutgers University. Dr. Oudemans works a lot, or is involved with blueberry and cranberry pathology in particular. And like I mentioned before, maybe some of you are going to be cooking with some of these particular crops that are very popular in New Jersey, maybe next week. But like I said before, also, they're very important staple crops within New Jersey agriculture. So I will turn it over to Dr. Oudemans. Thanks again for being here and joining us tonight.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. And, you know, I have to say that I'm not going to be giving you any cranberry recipes tonight.
That's fine.
but I will tell you that, you know, I met my wife and I lured her in with cranberry recipes. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So that was, she actually thought I was trying to mix her a drink instead of actually giving her a cranberry recipe.
That's funny.
Yeah. So I'm going to get started, and let me try and share my screen. Hopefully this works. Does everyone have it? I've been getting like little messages saying that Zoom crashed occasionally.
Yeah, no, it looks fine so far. Hopefully it doesn't do that.
Great. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tonight is the research going on at the P.E. Marucci Center for Blueberry and Cranberry Research and Extension. I've been working there since November 1st, 1993. And I recently, in the last 2 years, became director there. And it's sort of a new experience for me. And I'll share some of the experiences and a little bit of the history. One thing that I found out was that it started in 1918. So a few years ago, we actually celebrated our 100th year. As not being the P.E. Marucci Center, it actually started as the Cranberry Substation. But we've been around a long time. And I thought I was around for a long time, but apparently it's been around a lot longer. So one thing, and I'm sure most of you know this, but blueberries and cranberries all belong to the heath family, which is called the Ericaceae. And these are plants that are common in the Pine Barrens. We see azaleas and rhododendrons, leatherleaf, fetterbush, bearberry are all part of this really big family. And one of the reasons that they do so well here in the Pine Barrens is that they're adapted to the acidic soils that are common here, native here. And also, you know, along with that, the soils tend to be very low in nitrogen. So the plants in this area tend to be very well adapted to acquiring nitrogen. And another group of plants that you're definitely familiar with are the carnivorous plants, the ones that eat insects. And the reason that they eat insects is because the exoskeleton of insects is rich in nitrogen. It's N-acetylglucosamine, and they can digest that and get their nitrogen that way. So in the case of the Ericaceae, they have specialized fungi that are associated with the roots called mycorrhizae, and those fungi help facilitate the uptake of nitrogen. Now, there's mycorrhizae in lots of plants, and typically they help with phosphorus. But in the case of these specific ones, it's nitrogen. So a lot of it has to do with nitrogen uptake, pH, and that's what makes these plants so well adapted to the Pine Barrens. You know, of course, these are the two crops that we work on in New Jersey, the high bush blueberry. Everybody loves to eat, hopefully. And these are ripe from, you know, somewhere around the beginning to the middle of June, all the way to the end of July. And then this is the time of year for cranberries. And, you know, this is, in fact, we just finished the cranberry harvest about 2 weeks ago. So that's over now. Well, cranberry cultivation really started like back in the early 1800s. 1816 is like a date that people tend to fixate on. I think it's, you know, around then, because this guy Henry Hall was a captain in the American Revolution. And he, when it was over, he started farming cranberries, and he developed a lot of the techniques that are, some of them are still used today, mainly the use of sand. And I apologize for my dogs. I may have to go discipline them in a second. But they use this sand layer to get the cranberries to root, and then the cranberry grows as a stolon, and then they produce these runners that root again, and they'll just form a canopy this way. And so Henry Hall was really the guy who figured this out and came up with the basic methods to grow cranberries. In New Jersey, New Jersey was one of the recipients of this technology, and cranberry culture really became very popular. There's a nice painting that I found a while ago from Burrs Mills, showing the harvest of cranberries in the 1830s in New Jersey. And this area was really the center for blueberry or for cranberry production for a long time. One of the people who lived up there was this guy, Joseph J. White, or J.J. White, as a lot of people call them. And he actually wrote a book called Cranberry Culture, and that was published in the late 1800s. This book was also, a similar book was published in Massachusetts by a guy by the name of Eastwood. But this kind of book was really meant to help people learn how to grow cranberries and make it a much more amenable crop. So the popularity of cranberry agriculture really spread, mainly because of the health benefits and the usefulness of that fruit. It's high in vitamin C, so it's something that people really liked back then, because scurvy could still be a problem for people if they didn't have fruits and vegetables, especially high in vitamin C. And so when the cranberry industry started in New Jersey, a lot of it was marketed through these labels. And many of you have probably seen these labels: "Eat more cranberry." And each farm had its own specific label that could identify the cranberries. And this was the label for a quarter barrel. And just to let you know, a barrel is 100 pounds. And so this would be a 25-pound box of cranberries, quarter barrel. So J.J. White was also made famous by his daughter, who was Elizabeth White. And she grew up on White's Bog and was one of the two people who really domesticated blueberries. And again, people probably know this, but really a remarkable feat for someone who just loved the Pine Barrens and loved botany. She collaborated with this guy, Frederick Coville, and together they started the first blueberry breeding program and literally took blueberries out of the wild and put them into the New Jersey agriculture. Blueberries are now grown around the world. Antarctica, I think, is the only continent where they're not grown. And they're available 12 months of the year, if you haven't noticed. And that's because they're grown in the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere. They're grown, nearer to the equator than ever before. And there's a lot of research and technology that's gone into high bush blueberry, but that's a different talk. So while people were starting to grow cranberries, and while cranberry production started becoming popular, there were a number of challenges that arose. And the first challenge that arose in cranberry production was this disease here called Cranberry Fruit Rot, developed in the 1800s, and the fruit would just decay before they could harvest it. Barclay White, one of the was the parent of J.J. White, had this quote. He said, "Such has been my experience in the cultivation of the cranberry. Unless I can find a remedy for this rotting of the berry, I must abandon the business as unprofitable." So, let's take a little timeline here. Many of you have heard of the potato late blight epidemic that occurred in the 1860s. and that a lot of people of Irish descent moved to North America as a result of that epidemic. Well, at that time, people did not have an idea of the germ theory of disease. So there's no concept that there were microbes that could cause diseases, and that whole concept, was waiting to be developed. And so, in a sense, cranberry production was at the cutting edge of germ theory, trying to understand and how to handle these kinds of problems. Well, the cranberry growers were fairly influential, apparently, because they were able to lobby Washington, and they had a person from the Department of Agriculture at the time come to look into the problem. And his job, he was a microscopist. And so he came and investigated the problem. It's amazing to think that this actually made the news and was written up in the New York Times that he came to help solve the problem. But he actually did start to develop an answer to the problem. And he said that he had found that it was due to the soil, basically, that the soils were too acidic to grow plants properly, and that really they needed to start fixing the soil problem, and then the disease problem would go away. Of course, he had no idea that it was a disease at the time. It was kind of an unfortunate thing because he was incorrect. And there's this great quote from Theodore H. Budd, whose great grandson is still growing, or great great grandson, I think, is actually still growing cranberries. And he had this quote in a meeting, and I should mention that this meeting was called the American Cranberry Growers Association. It was started in the 1880s in response to cranberry fruit rot, and it became a lobbying organization to get people to do research on cranberries. So this whole concept started back in the 1880s. And they had these annual meetings where they would invite people to speak, and it was very impressive, especially the language that they used. And I'll just read this quote to you because I love reading it. There was a time, and only a few years ago, when this subject, rot, was the leading feature of the association, when members dared not speak or listen to any other subject. And in fact, I do not think this association would have been in existence today if this curse or blessing, whichever it may be, had not come upon us. Then we required large public halls in which to hold our meetings, and the large attendance was fully equaled by the interest and zeal manifested by its members. And our meetings were too short and few in number for members thirsty after knowledge. Liberal sums of money were steadily contributed to obtain the best scientists in the country, and our distress was so great and our petitions so loud that the government came to our rescue, and our meetings were honored for several years by the presence of Professor Taylor, sent here by the Commissioner of Agriculture as a scientist and expert to lead us out of our troubles and place cranberry growers of New Jersey once more on the road to prosperity. So that was the statement from Theodore Budd back in 1883, after Prof. Taylor had come to solve their problems. But as it turned out, Prof. Taylor wasn't exactly right. And this was, I'm not sure, I think this might have been also Barclay White. But at the meeting of his first attendance, he explained to us the cause and prescribed the remedy, and many a sad grower went home with a light heart and rosy expectations of hereafter gathering sound berries from his bogs that now produce only rotten ones. Prof. Taylor found our bogs too sour and needed lime or some other fertilizer to neutralize the poison acids and sweeten them. In examining the many bogs he visited, he found only one perfect bog, only one bog that needed no medicine and would be likely to always grow sound fruit. This was Mr. Bishop's bog at Manahawkin, but this perfect bog soon became sick, indeed so sick that medicine did it no good, and like many other bogs, went from bad to worse. So, this was the kind of the situation at the time. And during this time, there was, a lot of activity at the federal government level to start developing methodologies to improve, farming, to raise the level of education of farmers, and to start solving problems. And there were 3 acts that happened in succession that helped get the science of agriculture into the hands of farmers. And the first act was passed in 1862, the Morrill Act. And it basically took public lands and donated them to the states so that they could use that land to build colleges, or even sell the land to fund colleges for the benefit of agriculture and mechanic arts. The second act was the Hatch Act, and that's really the land grant concept. And in this, we started seeing that that agricultural research was integrated into academic programs, so that people could start to do practical research and then disseminate that to the public. The next act, the Smith-Lever Act, was designed to provide funding to put county agents in each county. So many of you have a county agent, and that originated from 1914 with the Smith-Lever Act. And so this sort of evolution provided us with what we now know as the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station. And that's what I'm a part of, and many of the other agricultural scientists are a part of. And the mission of the Ag Experiment Station is really interesting. I'm a plant pathologist, and so a lot of my science idols are plant pathologists. And this guy, J.G. Horsfall, was one of my major professor, and he was a really interesting guy and had a lot of great insights. And he summed this up by really quoting 2 people. One was E.C. Stakeman, and E.C. Stakeman was a plant pathologist out of Minnesota, and he said, for better or for worse, plant pathology, and we could substitute agricultural research in there, had its origin in the fields and granaries more than in the halls of ivy. Society needed agriculture, and agriculture needed plant pathology. And many of you have heard of Norman Borlaug, of course, because he was the father of the Green Revolution. Also, he was the grad student of E.C. Stakeman, and he summed it up a little bit more pithily, I guess is a good word. He said, our research must be good, but it must be good for something. And that really comes down to the mission of the Ag Experiment Station, the people who work for the Ag Experiment Station, that our research must have some kind of impact. And so one of the earliest people to work on cranberry fruit rot was this guy here, Byron Halstead. And if you go to Rutgers University, you go to the 3rd floor of Foran Hall, you'll see that there's a library there called the Halstead Library. And that was, of course, named after Byron Halstead. He was the first plant pathologist at the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station. He coined the term fungicide. And he was a professor there until 1918. But the most important thing is that he is credited for the first one to discover that the true cause of cranberry fruit rot was fungi. And in the background here, you can see the diagrams from his publication showing all of the different kinds of fungi that caused cranberry fruit rot. And so the American Cranberry Growers Association was extremely grateful for this research, and they gave him a lot of accolades for making so many advances in this area. And he really led the charge into developing control methods for this disease. So when the Cranberry Substation started in 1918, a lot of it was based on how to use different fungicides to control cranberry fruit rot and other things, insects, weeds. And we had a number of different scientists at that time. We had some USDA scientists, Clement Shear, Neil Stevens, and then we had the Rutgers directors, Beckwith, Wilcox, Dollart, and Marucci, were all really critical as this research center developed. The first research center, the first Cranberry Substation, was up at Whitespawn, and it's this little Sears Roebuck. They ordered it from the Sears Roebuck catalog and put it together once it got there, and that became the first lab. And this photo was taken in 1922. The lab then moved to Pemberton, where the Pinelands Commission is now, and this is the old Pinelands Commission building. And then in 1967, we moved to here at the at Lake Oswego, and we're still there and still growing. You can see we have the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station sign out front. And hopefully that means more to you now.
Hey,
So,
Peter?
Yes.
I do have a question in the chat about the drawings from Dr. Halstead. Did he hand draw those fungicides, or did he have an artist do them?
Those are all drawn by him, I believe. Those
very
are
cool.
they're called camera lucida drawings. So it's when you have a microscope back in the old days and you look through it, and then you hold your hand next to the microscope, there's a little device that points down at your hand, and you can literally trace the outline of the fungi or of the structures under the microscope. It's called the camera lucida. And these are all camera lucida drawings. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool for sure. So
Great, thank you.
yeah, no problem. Anytime. Jump in anytime. So the next problem that really popped up in New Jersey was a disease called false blossom. So you can imagine the growers are just starting to get fruit rot under control. They've got some methodologies that work, and it's becoming acceptable. And then a new disease pops up, and this disease caused the cranberry plants to grow like this. And you can see these are the flowers up here, and they literally produced no fruit. This is a normal cranberry. This is a diseased cranberry. And this was at a time in the early 1900s when we were just at the beginning of understanding plant pathology. And there's some really lovely work that was done with Irene Dabrowski. She was at the Boyce Thompson, and some other people like Charles Beckwith. And they figured out that this disease was transmitted by a leafhopper, which is an insect. And she actually went so far as to show that the salivary glands of the infected leafhopper were modified and actually contained the pathogen. So she did some really amazing microscopy work to show that this was a problem. Well, this disease had been imported on vines from Wisconsin. So one of the first diseases that we've seen where a disease is brought from one state to another on infected plant material. It spread rapidly in New Jersey, and it was pretty devastating. And in Massachusetts, it was also transported to the West Coast, but because the little leafhopper wasn't there, the disease did not become important. So this is a map from the National Park Service showing the impact of false blossom on the crop in New Jersey. Before the 1950s, before the disease really, caused all this damage, we had about 13,000 acres of cranberries in New Jersey. You can see each dot here. Well, someone will have to tell me because I've got it blocked. Each dot represents 10 acres of cranberries. And you can see we were all the way up into Burlington, Ocean, Monmouth, even down into Atlantic County, Cape May County. We had cranberries all over the place. Today, we're down to just over 3,000 acres. And that reduction in acreage is due mainly to the impact of this disease, this false blossom disease. The plants would get infected. There was no cure for an infected plant. And so people just abandoned their cranberry bogs. And really, this disease created another opportunity. It's always amazing how we can figure out problems. And what happened was we established the cranberry breeding program around 1929. Some of the important people in this effort were Charles Beckwith, Neil Stevens, and a variety of other people. I'm not even coming close to mentioning them all. And of course, by cranberry breeding, I mean taking the pollen grains from one plant, the male parent, placing them on the stigma of the female parent, letting them germinate, and then collecting those seeds from those controlled crosses and looking at and screening the offspring. Before the breeding program started, all of the cranberry varieties were native selections. Howe's, Early Black, McFarland, Stevens were just cool genotypes that people found in the woods and started propagating. After that point, they started doing these crosses, and along with the crosses, they developed an assay to start looking at the attractiveness of the leafhopper to these different genotypes. And they produced this one variety called Stevens, which was much less attractive. And it's a very common variety today. Now, keep in mind, that breeding program started in 1929, just for simple math, 1930. It took 20 years of breeding efforts before that variety was released and started being planted in commercial beds. It was originally called, the selection was number 33, and people started propagating it throughout the growing region. But that was a big effort. And at that point, the breeding program in 1950 or shortly after, it pretty much shut down until the 1970s when it started up again. At Rutgers, we have one very famous plant pathologist, John Chen, who was the chair when I first came there. And he was the first person to identify the cause of false blossom. Everybody had called it a virus. It was a microscopic particle that they didn't really have the technology to see, but he was able to show that it was actually a very specialized form of bacteria unique to plants. And that these bacteria all have these effects on the flowers of plants. And so there's many different cases, but he was one of the first to actually culture and identify these organisms. So with all this research going on, there were trends in the yield. This was having an impact on the production of cranberries. And this red line shows you the production in barrels, this is in pounds per acre. If you divide by 100, that's barrels. So in the 1900s, we were somewhere around 20 barrels per acre, or 2,000 pounds per acre. Now, at a certain point in the 1950s, we see that there was an inflection point. And if you draw this line, it's about 200 pounds per acre per year. And this seemed to continue for a number of years. And what is driving that increase in yield? Why did it start? Why did it occur? And will it keep going? And one of the interesting things is blueberries had sort of a similar yield trend. They're just a little bit over 2,000 pounds an acre. And then around 1990, and I always like to say pretty much the year that I started at Rutgers, the inflection point started. I don't think that had anything to do with it. And I'll show you that in a second. So what happened with cranberries was a lot of different technologies, a lot of different types of research, and a lot of factors. So one of the first things was they switched from hand harvesting to water harvesting. And this allowed the collection of a much more efficient collection and harvesting of cranberries. Then we started seeing new varieties, like the Stevens variety started being planted. Irrigation was introduced. We started getting improved insect control, new generations of fungicides, improved fertilizer use, aerial applications of pesticides. All of these methodologies had measurable impacts on increasing the yield of cranberries and blueberries. For blueberries, this inflection point occurred when a new variety called Duke was introduced. And this was one of the first times that you really got a big bump in that production cycle. So, with all this technology, there are some additional problems. And one of the things that happened back in 1959, every cranberry grower either remembers it, or if they lived through it, or remembers it because they were told about it. November of 1959, the Secretary of Health and Education and Welfare said that the cranberry was toxic because it was receiving a herbicide that was a teratogen. It caused cancer in rats. And that year, Mamie Eisenhower, the president's wife, served applesauce with dinner. So that was the first year that cranberries were not served with the turkey. And this had a devastating effect on the cranberries for that year. The outcome of this was just remarkable. Once again, sometimes a challenge becomes an opportunity, but there were laws that were revised regarding zero tolerance. So we started seeing the development of risk cups and how can we manage crops but keep the public safe and do that in a reasonable way. It turned out that there were contaminated cranberries in this case, but they were only from a very small section in the Pacific Northwest. Nowhere else did they have high residues of the crop. Apparently, John F. Kennedy got a lot of votes that year when he, in his campaign, downed a couple glasses of cranberry juice cocktail without lynching. And, people were really impressed with his, of busting the myth. So that kind of sort of summarizes the kind of the mission of what we do at the P.E. Marucci Center. We're a multi-institutional group. We have the USDA housed with us, Rutgers University, Ocean Spray. And our mission is really to develop tools and techniques to enhance the efficiency of blueberry and cranberry production. And one thing that I added since I became director, and I can do that kind of thing, is I added this statement that the center will foster an ecosystem for innovation. So in other words, we welcome innovation. We like to think outside the box and come up with new and better techniques. Currently, our research staff looks something like this. We have people in breeding, bioinformatics, entomology, health benefits, integrated pest management, and plant pathology and weed science. Each of these scientists that's laid out here all have a program. And so under them, they have technicians and graduate students that are studying different aspects of blueberry and cranberry production. This is a photograph of a partial photograph of our farm. Our labs are housed here. We have greenhouse space throughout here. And then for cranberry research, we have 20 half-acre cranberry bogs for doing different kinds of research, and then 2 5-acre bogs for all of our breeding efforts and selecting new genotypes. We have blueberry fields over here and here, again, for the same purpose. So pretty active little research center. A lot of our work is focused on field work. And here's a photograph of us harvesting field plots in the fall and trying to get data from our different field plots at harvest. We look at diseases, we look at insects, all kinds of different factors that affect blueberries and or cranberries. Some of the research that we do is focused on developing new and better fungicides or looking at ways to improve timing or the cultural practices of them. One of the things that we battle a lot is that people think, oh, you're using these toxic fungicides. Why aren't you using organic control methods? In our area, it's very difficult because we're so far south. We're on the very southern edge of cranberry production, and we do have high pressure from diseases. But at the same time, we're trying to figure out ways to minimize their usage to the point where at harvest, most of the time we're seeing very low to almost no residues of any of our pesticides on the fruit. And that's a big target of our research here. So fruit rot was a problem back in the 1800s. Well, this was a survey that I did back in 2013, and I thought it's kind of interesting. We're growing the cultivar Stevens in this case, and I sampled about 130 acres of cranberry beds. And you can see these black dots are the points where I took the data. So I had 201. I was shooting for 200, but I guess I got a little zealous. And, we sampled throughout all these beds. And what we found was that the average production was 34,000 pounds of cranberries per acre. But what we also found was that the fruit rot level was 24%. They were losing 24% of their crop to fruit rot. So in other words, they could have been producing about 41,000 pounds of cranberries per acre. And this was an eye-opener because we thought we were doing a pretty good job. And when we calculated those losses based on this crop, just in this small area, we're looking at a loss of around $830,000 worth of cranberries. And so this has really allowed us to put a number on and set a goal for how much fruit rot we can control and what the economic benefit will be, to cranberry growers and to the region. So it's kind of a motivating factor, as it were. The part of our research is to look at developing these basic questions, and the entomology program has done a very nice job of putting this slide together, looking at basic questions, basic ecological questions. Does domestication affect plant defenses against herbivores? So it's not something that you can actually take home and do something about, but it's interesting because it asks the question, what are we breeding for, and how is the domestication syndrome affecting our crops? But then it comes back to these sort of applied questions: is can we manipulate insects to control behavior, to control pests? Can we use attractant? Can we do mating disruption? So there's all these different applied questions that we're asking as well in order to solve the kind of problems that growers are having. The weed science program is relatively new. We had a weed scientist hired in 2017. And so for him, I actually copied this quote from Byron Halstead because I thought it was such a great quote. And by now, you know that I like quotes. And so Byron Halstead said, he described weeds as pestiferous, vile, execrable, and miserable weeds that have asserted their inborn rights above all others and fought people for the possession of the earth. And it's interesting and true for almost all of the factors that we fight against. We're battling microbes, insects, and weeds that literally sit down at the table first, right? We're fertilizing, irrigating, and creating this nice environment for our crops to grow to feed people. And these other organisms are competing with us. They're competing with us for sunlight. They're competing with us for fertilizer, for water. And in the case of weeds, and this was before the turn of the century, it was concluded that weeds seem to reduce wealth by 17 million in crop loss. Very significant effects. So some of the targets that our weed scientist, Terry Basis, is focused on are things like Carolina redroot, loose strife, and different things like that. So, these are all targets for weed control. A lot of our research goes into and is published annually in these different recommendations for growers. So we have one book called the 2022 Commercial Blueberry Pest Control Recommendations for New Jersey. And you can see, a lot of it is focused on how to use chemicals and fertilizers properly. And that includes biological control methods for controlling pests and diseases. For cranberries, we have a similar publication for cranberries on how to manage diseases in cranberries and how best to use these types of chemicals in as safe a way as possible. We also have a breeding program that's vital in developing new cultivars. The breeders develop targets, right? They'll have different breeding targets, and they'll look at, what kind of things are we looking for in new varieties. Now, like I said, if you start breeding a new variety, it's going to be at least 10 years and maybe 20 before that variety is ready to hit the market from the time you do the first cross. So this is a long-term investment, and you really need a crystal ball to be able to look forward and see what characteristics you're breeding for. And so they're looking at machine harvestability, concentrated ripening. Like you can see here, this cluster of berries is nicely ripened and could be easily machine harvested. This second flush of berries could also be harvested at a later date without having a lot of loss and more gradual ripening period. And then things like disease resistance and of course yield and self-proof. There's lots of different characteristics. In cranberry, our cranberry breeding program has been very successful over the years. So much so that we're very proud of this, that the cranberry breeding program is one of the top 5 revenue generators for Rutgers University overall. It's, some of the characteristics that they're going after are fruit rot, controlling, having a better control of fruit rot through genetics. And then actually some of the phenolic compounds, the health beneficial compounds, things that are antioxidant or anti-inflammatory, or those factors that prevent urinary tract infections from anti-adhesion that are now being shown to have effects on tooth decay, on ulcers, right? These are all compounds that people are looking at for breeding targets. And so some of the varieties that we're developing, we study in these replicated trials. And this is kind of a cool photo here showing the different varieties that are harvested. You can actually see the different colors of the varieties at harvest and the different characteristics of those varieties. One of the things that we spend a lot of time on is trying to understand the weather. This is Dave Robinson. He's our state climatologist, and he runs a weather network throughout the entire state. We utilize this network, and we utilize it for a variety of different crops, and we also utilize it for cranberry production. He's part of something called the Northeast Weather Association, and this weather association has a network of weather stations throughout the Northeast, and you can use these weather stations to do all kinds of management, agricultural management. You can use it to do predicting diseases, predicting insects, looking at when weeds are going to start flowering. There's a lot of information. So if you were to look up the Northeast Weather Association via Google, you could actually zero in on a weather station near you and then see all the models that are being run for that station in relation to agriculture. With climate, it's so important for cranberries. And, one of the things that you might have noticed in this graph was that on our climb to a high yield, look at this year, this particular year right here. Bam. That was 1972, and the crop production bottomed out. And it was basically because of this wet weather, incredibly wet spring, wet summer, wet fall, and the production just dropped. And these are the kind of things that we can't really do anything about unless we can predict. And so that's something that this can really help with. One of the other things we're working with quite a bit right now is the use of drones. Drones are great for mapping, for detecting, finding diseases, finding weeds, mapping weeds. And we have a project with the Atlantic Cape Community College. They have a unmanned aircraft systems specialist degree. So you can go there, get a degree in drones, and then go out and find jobs. I hired drone pilots. These two guys were a few years ago. I hired drone pilots from them every year. And we use those drones to do a lot of our mapping. And we have a project with machine learning right now, trying to count cranberries from the drone images and automate that. So I'm going to really stop there and just give you some concluding thoughts. And talk a little bit more about our mission. I mean, we deal a lot with risk. How do we minimize risk? And, the things that we worry about are climate change. And whether it's, anthropomorphic climate change or climate change just due to natural variation, that's not, I don't have a dog in that fight. But what I am concerned about is how we stay resilient to these kind of climate changes. Frost, freezing, droughts, extreme weather events. This can really cause big problems, especially when you're thinking about, things blowing in with pathogens and pests or just becoming more conducive to these kinds of organisms. And so, part of our resiliency is to develop better predictive methods and to do research on these up and coming problems. And over the past 5 years, we've probably had 5 new problems. Think about it: spotted lanternfly, spotted winged Drosophila. We have, problems with overheating of cranberries from increased solar radiation. These are all kinds of different problems that we've had. And then the management strategies that we develop, first of all, detection and response. We have to know that this problem is coming and then have a way to respond to it. We have to have new methods ready to go when they show up. These could be cultural methods, they could be chemical methods, it depends. This is something that we work on a lot in blueberries, less so in cranberries, but the organic matter of the soil in blueberries is just critical. And then the development of new varieties is something that we look at a lot. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think there's a whole bunch of chats in there, and I haven't been keeping up with them at all. So sorry, Caitlin. I thought I'd throw out some nice shots of the cranberry harvests, since I can't take you there via Zoom today. Just have some pictures.
That's a great picture. Wow.
Yeah, they're nice shots of the cranberry harvest. So I see I have some chats.
Yeah, I don't think too many questions so far, just a lot of comments about what you've been talking about. But if anyone does have a question, feel free to come off mute or put your question in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Oudemans. That was excellent. Great information.
Yeah, well, I'm happy. And like I said, I'm happy to answer any kind of questions that you guys might have or, wonder about. Someone was asking me about the drone program. It's Atlantic Cape Community College drone program. Hey, Joe.
How you doing, Peter? All right.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
You too. Absolutely. Can I add something about cranberries?
Oh, please do.
So I follow a lot of stuff about nutrition and whatnot and health, and they came across a nice article I found on in November 2022. It says cranberries are packed with antioxidants. Cranberries have an anti-inflammatory effect in your body, which may reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes, cancer, and heart disease.
Yeah.
Just added some information.
And I'd throw one more thing in that, is that there's, we have these syndromes, like these, we develop these syndromes where we're sort of, as a whole population, we're getting overweight and more sluggish. And the antioxidants can really help, help you rebound from that.
Right. Yeah, they picked primarily cranberries as one of the top, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's called metabolic syndrome. Someone has talked to.
I don't know, but you know, to me, what they talked about sounds good to me,
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
yeah. You know, one of the challenges we have is trying to, you know, develop cranberries that require less added sugar.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
it's
and
sugar
so
and salt are that are killers, right? Supposedly,
I know,
pretty much.
yeah.
It's one or
So
the other.
I'm one of those people that likes to eat raw cranberries, and I think I'm rare, right? Because they're so sour.
Well, I'm gonna try a
Um,
bag. I just bought them the
oh,
other
good.
day to try after reading this article too. I've always done blueberries, but
Mhm.
you know, I pop them in the freezer too to see what happens.
Oh, great smoothies. Don't add any sugar,
Yeah,
just
right,
banana,
right,
you know,
exactly.
some kind of sweet fruit.
Mhm.
I saw a question down here, and I had an answer. Oh, is there research into cranberry types that allow multiple harvests a year? You know, that's something that there isn't. Um, and in part, it's because the cranberry blooms in, you know, June, and then it usually takes 2 or 3 months for the berries to develop. And so they're tied into this cycle of, you know, of the seasons, and there isn't really an opportunity to do multiple harvests. Now, we are starting to see more and more cranberries grown in Chile, south of the in the southern hemisphere. And so cranberries in Chile are harvested in, so here they're harvested in October, which is the 10th month. So 6 months later, they're harvested in Chile. And so we are able to get 2 harvests a year, but that would be, you know, using a geographical kind of method. Anyone have any other questions? We're, Caitlin, this is like a first for me. I'm like, it's, you said end at 7:30, it's 7:20.
Oh, we're right on time. That's great. But
That's
actually,
crazy.
I had a quick question. You mentioned some new challenges like spotted lanternfly, solar radiation, I think was one of them. So what, in terms of like changing climate, you know, any climate change related challenges are they making fighting those different types of fungus a little bit more challenging? How is that tied in?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because I get that question a lot, and I got that question maybe a couple of years ago, and you know, I'm, you know, obviously I'm pretty, you know, aware of climate change and the effects, and I'm, you know, I've read a lot about it. And when I got the question, I felt very sort of inadequate because I didn't really know how to, like, how is it affecting me? How's climate change affecting me? Right. And it was really something that was difficult and required quite a bit of thought and, you know, discussion. And what we're seeing in terms of you know, changing climate is, first of all, extreme weather events. You know, we were lucky 2 years ago, 2021, the hurricanes all went west of us. They tore through Pennsylvania, but then they went straight north right up to Massachusetts and basically ruined the Massachusetts cranberry crop, right, with flooding and that kind of thing. So in some ways we dodged the bullet. Will we dodge the bullet every year? Probably not. So extreme weather events, you know, more hurricanes, I think is something that we really need to worry about. The subtle effects of climate change, though, are really interesting. If you increase the temperature 1 or 2 degrees on average per year, you're actually changing the growing zones. You know how USDA has those growing zones in North America? Well, we're in zone 7 right now, and we're on the edge for cranberry production. If we start to develop more of like a Delaware kind of climate, which isn't a big difference, we're going to really be unable to grow the current varieties of cranberries because they'll rot, they won't produce, they're not going to be getting enough chilling hours. And, those things are very real. And we're literally living right on the edge. I had an interview today with a reporter, and I said, boy, I just wish I had a crystal ball to see what was coming down the road, and be able to predict the next 5 years. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, interesting. I was thinking the same thing as far as the drought, the intense rain, how does that affect the pathology and everything? So that's really interesting.
So the interesting thing about the drought this year, so we had a pretty severe drought in August, but we're really lucky in New Jersey. We're sitting on top of the Cohansey Aquifer, we're sitting on the Kirkwood Aquifer. We have a lot of water, so we can irrigate. And because there was a lack of rain in August, our cranberry fruit quality was stupendous, almost the best we've ever had. And it was because of the dry climate and the lack of fungi, basically. So
yeah, wow. All right, I think we have one more question from Charles. How is the issue with bees affecting local cranberry and blueberry pollination, and is there any research being done locally for this? That's a great question.
Yeah, it's amazing. The blueberries and cranberries are both pollinated by honeybees. We bring in honeybees every year. We hire beekeepers to bring in hives. The cost of hives has been going up every year. When I started, we were somewhere around $60 a hive. It rapidly went to $90 a hive, $110 a hive. We have all these problems with bees. Bees are transported all over the country to pollinate almonds in California and citrus in Florida. And then we bring them here, ask them to pollinate blueberries and cranberries. And blueberries and cranberries are not particularly generous when it comes to offering back like nectar, So the bees get a little bit stressed under those conditions. And then on top of that, we're asking them to pollinate a lot more, work harder. We tend to use more bees thinking that'll solve the problem. And so there's a lot of research going on right now with pollination issues and understanding how these stress factors can affect honeybee hive health. And hive health is really one of the biggest issues there right now. We're not there yet. We have a lot of questions to answer. There's interactions. If we're using different chemicals during bloom, are we interacting with those different chemicals? Is it something else? Is it the nutritional aspect of the nectar? Has that been changing? There's still some open questions there. But yeah, you bring up a really, and if there's one area I think that's going to be really interesting to focus on over the next few years is to look at the honeybee research that's going on. So.
All right. Well,
great.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Oudemans, for your time. And I'm going to have just everybody do a quick virtual round of applause.
There is one more.
Oh, sorry, there is one more question. We are a little over time, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's okay. It's a good question, and I don't mind answering it. Thanks, Ben. Roundup is one of those herbicides that when it first came out, people really believed it was a savior. I mean, you could buy it at Home Depot, you still can, and spray it on your weeds. It killed the weeds. It's fantastic stuff. Health effects started showing up with this product. People were getting exposed to it. One of the other effects was that if you spray a crop with it, that it had sublethal effects. Roundup will actually knock out the immune system of plants and increase the level of disease in the plants. So you could spray Roundup on say a blueberry plant, and see no effects for 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden the plant drops dead. And it's because of these sublethal effects. So we're really looking at finding different herbicides to use. You know, it's in some ways it's a great tool, but it's also comes with its risks. And you know, one of the things that it's such a great tool, it's been overused. You know, it's sort of like if you had a hammer that every other time you swung the hammer, you hit your thumb. You know, how long would you use the hammer for? It's that kind of situation. So we're definitely heading towards different types of herbicides, and you know, the research is really going forward. You know, a lot of ways that people use herbicides is to develop genetically modified plants. So they'll put in Roundup resistant genes in the plants. Roundup ready soybeans, you know, are very common. That's not going to happen in blueberries and cranberries because both of the grower organizations have actually said that they don't want any kind of GMO technology going into these native crops because they're native crops. When you harvest cranberries, the cranberries float downstream and you know, colonize the edges of the streams, and there's all kinds of escape. So you can't really contain the technology. And so both the high bush, the US High Bush Blueberry Council and the American Cranberry Growers Association have argued against the use of GMO plants. So I really think that the use of Roundup will decline. It's not a heavily used herbicide right now. It's used, but in very specific ways. And I think people are all anxious to find better ways to do it. So, yeah.
All right, Thomas, did you have your hand up? Did you want to ask one thing real quick?
Did I just add something?
That was by
Whoever,
accident.
after-
Sorry for that.
That was by accident.
I don't, can I add something,
Oh.
Caitlin?
Yeah,
Go.
go ahead.
Peter, I don't know if you saw some of my comments, but my next door neighbor, her uncle is Marucci.
I saw that.
Yeah. She was, do you know Dr. Gary Pavlis?
Of course.
I'm good friends with him.
I know that.
So I pour his wine, right? So
Yeah.
the
I know that.
conversation started months ago between her and me about Dr. Gary Pavlis. And then she said, oh, my uncle is Marucci, this guy Marucci. And I'm like, I don't know who he is, right? But
Yeah.
she's
Yeah,
right,
you
she's
do.
right next door to me. I've been talking to her at the same time, texting her and sending her the pictures. So just,
that's awesome.
She's all excited. She wants to send the YouTube video to her sisters and her cousins.
That's wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Pretty
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, that's
Small
awesome.
world, right?
Yeah,
You
it is
know?
a small world.
Yeah, and that's great. And I know we'll put out the YouTube recording for this session probably within the next couple of days. That happens really quick once we have a session that's concluded. Usually it's on YouTube the next day, but I can send everybody who attended tonight a notification about that when it's up, so you can send them that. But thanks, Joe. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending tonight. This was a great session. Thank you, Peter, for your time and all of
Pleasure.
your knowledge. This was great. So I hope everybody have a fantastic holiday. And we will see you at the next session, hopefully. So take care, everybody.
Eat lots of cranberries.
Yes,
care, Caitlin.
will do.
Bye-bye.
Everybody, thank you.
Thanks.